we'll kind of jump into the general, I guess, hierarchy of modeling in Rhino. So the way it goes is you start with a point, and then points become a line. A line exists between 2 points, or are essentially an infinite series of points, and that makes what Rhino calls a curve. So you go from a point to a curve to a surface to a polysurface or a solid, right? So for example, just to illustrate that, we have a few things here, and you can, they're on over here, right? So you have single point, you have polyline or line segment. Let's make a more noticeable color so this shows up. Right. So what I just did there, of course, was I right-clicked, new layer, and then once you have a layer, you can click this little square. That'll let you set the color of the layer, and then you can name it, of course, whatever you want, right? So, and then you can select these objects, go to their properties, and then in their layer property, you can just set them to that layer, which it'll show the color. I just called it X for whatever reason, and now you have them there, right? So you have, also be sure to double click or single click or double click depending the layer that you want to use, and if it has a check mark by it, that is the current layer. Cool. So we can make some various objects here just to kind of get the point across of what these are. Let's see. Okay, cool. So this is sort of how basic geometry works in Rhino, right? So you start with a point, right? So that's a point there. It doesn't really do much, it's just a point. You can make more of them if you want. But I mean, for the purposes of what I'm kind of going through, points exist at endpoints on a line, right? So if you look, that is a point, but there's a line associated with it. So if you click just that vertex, you can move it, and the curve will obey what you're moving, right? Also, so once you have a curve, surfaces are kind of made up of curves, right? So you have like a border with a fill to it. So if you, and this is important, Control, Shift, click, you can select individual elements of more advanced geometry, right? So with a line, it's simple because, it's just 2 points, right? There's not a whole lot to it. A point, you can only select that. But with a surface is really made up of a few things. So you can Control, Shift, click the edge, and from there, that gives you control of just the edge. So you can move it around if you want, up, down, whatever you want to do. You can click it, and then you can type a command, and because it's selected, you can select just that point, and then move it down, same thing. You can run it again. You could snap it to that edge, right? So you can kind of see how you start to, manipulate some geometry and snap it to other points. Right, so you can select 2 edges if you want, and you can move those up, right? And then you kind of get, a more modified thing, or you can Control, Shift, click. And what I'm saying is you hold Control and Shift down at the same time. Whatever you click, it'll give you an option to select just that piece of whatever you want. So you could select just that vertex if you want, just that point, and you can move that up if you want, and not the rest of it, right? Or you could move, you could select that point, and you could move it over here to this shape, right? So you can see how you can start to like modify one surface and just snap it to various things. As long as it's a planar surface, you can manipulate it by just moving its edges and points through that Control, Shift, click method, right? So Control, Shift, click, select the vertex edge, move it, type move, and then you can just snap it, like I showed you before with the snaps, to that edge there, right? And then you can start to actually sort of build onto each other with that. So that's a surface, and then over here we have a polysurface, which is made up of a few things. If you go to its properties over here on the right, you'll see it's a closed solid polysurface. That's what we like to see. You don't want it to say open, otherwise you're not going to be able to, export this to something like Revit, or you're not going to be able to 3D print it. It needs to read closed solid polysurface. But what you can do then with a closed solid poly surface is you can select, Control, Shift, click, select each edge of it. And if you want, you can move that up, right? And you'll see now, just like we modified the surface with its edges, right? So with a surface, you can move an edge, and the whole thing will abide by that. If you move a surface of a closed poly surface, or just any poly surface, the rest of it will move with it. You could also select just the edge and move just that, right? And everything else will follow it. Or you could select just the vertex. The same method, Control, Shift, click. Once you have that vertex, you'll see it gives you a highlight of each of the component pieces that it thinks you're trying to select. Rhino's nice where if you have overlapping kind of hitboxes of what you're trying to choose, it'll give you a particular list of what it thinks you want, and then you can just choose which one you want. So I mean, I'm moving kind of fast, but when you're doing this, you can of course move as slow as you want, and Rhino's really good about just kind of like making sure that you're doing what you want to do. So you can select the vertex, and then you can move that vertex down, and you can see that you get a lot of control over something that may have just been a box, right? And now you can just sort of manipulate the whole thing. Similarly, you can scale those, right? Just like we did before, you can rotate. I would be careful with rotations because I'll show you right here. If you Control Shift click a face and then say you want to just rotate that 45 degrees, you start to kind of twist geometry in a weird way, which can be cool for some design moves, but if you get too crazy with it, you might end up kind of making it twist too much and intersect on itself. And Rhino's great because there's a lot of freedom to what you can do to the geometry present, but it's not great because it will pretty much let you do whatever you want to do to it. And you might end up making some physically impossible shapes somehow by making things sort of like intersect each other by twisting or mangling things too much. So you just kind of have to exercise caution when doing that. Otherwise, you can easily go off the rails. Cool. So that's kind of how you, I guess, those are sort of the four basic definitions of Rhino geometry. You have a point. Points make up lines. Lines make up surfaces. Surfaces make up poly surfaces. Simple as that. And up top here, you can see on this ribbon, right here, right? You have like your standard bar, which is mainly what I like to operate in because it gives you just a basic set of the very elementary sort of functions here that you can do, the various commands. And really, as a early Rhino user, you really just kind of need these. And then anything else, you'll figure it out by either typing it, or you can go down to the various tools. So you can go to curve tools for curves, and then it goes to surface tools, and then it goes to solid tools, right? We're not going to talk about meshes because it gets more complex. We might touch on that on a future video. But in curve tools, for example, you have the ability to make a control point curve. In this case, you see you make a series of control points, and you could loop it back, right? That's how you might make a a more organic, or if you're doing kind of landscaping or more of an organic form, it's based on these control points, which instead of being a point on the line like these direct vertex points, what it is you can click each one, and by modifying it, you'll see it's almost like there's like a string or two strings sort of attached, and they're highlighted here between the points next to them, and then the curve is almost like held between that. So you can kind of push and pull and form it along those points. Right? So just for example, that's how you can sort of modify a more organic shape. I mean, feel free to go crazy with that. Don't go too crazy. I would start with the basics and figure out just how to make these play nice first before you start making things too crazy. But that's just an example of a more advanced curve tool. In surface tools, you also have, some lofts and things like that use curves to inform surface geometry. The easiest one to do is planar surf, and that's something that's good to know because, for example, we built this curve on one plane, right? It's flat. It's level with the construction plane. It's that way because we have this on right down here. It says planar. You can see it here. Oops. Down between ortho and OSNAP. And because of that, because it's flat, we can run a command called planar surf right there. Or we can click this button here, and that'll make a surface right there, right? So similar to this, and how this exists within the bounds of these, right? This exists within the bounds of this curve. The two are still separate, but now you have something that you can use to actually inform a surface, right? So that's one way to form a surface from curves, right? Similarly, if you use, say, like a rectangle command, just type rectangle, that'll allow you to draw a rectangle, just like that, see? If you use planar surf, now there's a surface there from the bounds of the rectangle, and the curve is still there. If you don't want to keep the curve, you can select the delete input option up here, but that's more advanced, I guess. I mean, you can just sort of do it manually as well if you don't want it there. So you can do planar surface. You could also run an extrude CRV, extrude curve, right there. And what that'll let you do is just sort of pull it up, right? And now you have some bounds to a box. Cool. So I guess from there, you know, we could, there's a lot of different tools. I mean, you can find them in here, you can play with them. Solid tools as well. If you know, similar to how you can extrude a curve like that, you could also just run an extrude surf, right? And there you go. So it works the same way, right? You can see how they're parallel, but they each do a different thing. There's just like another layer of depth or detail from moving from a surface to a poly surface, from a curve to a surface to a poly surface. That's kind of the progression. Right. So, and then of course, if you wanted, like we showed you before, you could Control-Shift-Click, and then, you know, move each of these. The gumball is nice, especially in Rhino 6, because it has these little circles on it, and that circle in itself is an extrude command, right? So if you click that on a surface, and you say, I want this surface to go up 10 feet, click it, type 10, boom. Now you have a poly surface there. Same with a curve. If you want a curve to become a surface, click that, make it go up 10 feet, boom. So the gumball is really nice and easy at simplifying things. Okay. Beyond that, I mean, that's kind of the real basics of just modeling. What else could we do here? I mean, if you want basic shapes within the standard toolbar here, where this box is, you have solid creation. So if you just want to more or less play with blocks kind of for the time being, you know, you can make boxes. You can make cylinder, right? Similarly, oops. You can make pyramids. It's all in here, right? You can make a cone. Each of them has its own series of, you know, steps, right? And you can just sort of play around with these shapes and see how they interact with each other. And then, of course, you can move them around. You know, you can snap it from there to up there and start to actually play with these shapes and just kind of get a handle of the actual model space and see how these kind of interact with each other. Cool. So I guess beyond that, just another cool command that's really nice and easy for at least maybe cleaning some stuff up is hide and show, right? So let's say, like, oh, I just want to focus on this thing here, right? But I don't want the rest of it. You can just select the rest of it, type hide, boom, now it's all gone. I mean, you know, ideally you could keep it on a different layer if you really want to keep things organized that much. But if you just want certain things out of the way for the time being, select them, hide. Then if you just type show, anything that's in that hidden space will then just show. And then of course you can just, you know, edit, undo, redo as much as you want to get it to come back. Great. So I think that's all we'll really cover for the time being for just sort of basic modeling in Rhino. I'll have, you know, some more thorough videos in the future, but this is really just kind of the absolute basics and a very digestible sort of time frame for you. So with that, I guess I can show you just a couple things of what you can sort of do with Rhino if you really sort of like push it to a point and, you know, get a little more advanced with your techniques. Okay, cool. So here we are. Right, so with a model like this, you get a little bit more of an idea of how much you can sort of add and, you know, diversify your layers and all that, right? So within my layers palette here, I have a number of different layers. You know, each of them can be, you know, turned off, turned back on because they're sorted into sublayers. Each has materials and things like that, and you can just see that you can get, you know, a very high amount of detail in various things, right? Whether it's, you know, railings, curtain walls, structures, soffits, ducts, pipes, columns, things like that, right? So this is just kind of an example of how much, how far you can kind of take Rhino in a way. And the sort of finished product after rendered. So you can kind of make something that ends up, you know, a lot more fleshed out and a lot more full just from, you know, straight from Rhino. You don't need to move into any other rendering software except maybe Enscape. And you can produce an image that's pretty thorough and gets the point across. These images came straight from Rhino, from a high-rise project, so it has the capacity to take a very large scaled model and produce very clean images just straight from it, and, you know, do a certain amount of layering and things like that. And you can produce really kind of anything from just a 3D model. It also has the capacity to do various, you know, sun studies and things like that, getting an idea of various, you know, geographic locations, times of day, and all that. I mean, it can really kind of sort of substitute AutoCAD too for 2D, you know, vector drawing as well if you need to sort of do that, right? You can just operate from a top view and produce images from there. I think that should cover it for now. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our tutor team via our email. And, you know, or if you want to learn more separately, myself or any of the other teammates would be glad to kind of give you a rundown of whatever you want to look into. If not, you know, we'll have more videos coming to you soon. This is just really to kind of get the point across of, you know, the capabilities of Rhino and sort of the basics and familiarizing yourself with the workspace and the program. So with that, thanks for watching if you made it this far, and we'll see you next time.